I'm very curious to how much it's going to cost, right? Because what it came down to, the prison system, the cost of just the food alone is one thing. It's the medication, the medical side. We had guys that were illegal immigrants intentionally getting apprehended, knowing they'd spent time in prison, knowing that they had AIDS, HIV, these very expensive kind of diseases that they knew that our medical kind of rule and law was to continue to provide care. And so that was interesting to me to know, like, how much money are we spending on just these illegal migrants?
Recently, President Trump signed an executive order to expand the migrant operations center at Naval Station Guantanamo Bay to full capacity. It read, "This memorandum is issued in order to halt the border invasion, dismantle criminal cartels, and restore national sovereignty." As News Nation notes, the order directs the Department of Defense and Department of Homeland Security to prepare a 30,000 person migrant facility at Guantanamo Bay, a location that has traditionally been used to house military prisoners, including several al-Qaeda operatives linked to the 9/11 attacks. However, even though the order said that high-priority criminal aliens unlawfully present in the United States would be sent to the facility, a senior Department of Homeland Security official confirmed to News Nation that low-risk migrants are also being held at the facility, saying all these individuals committed a crime by entering the United States illegally. What are your thoughts about sending immigrants who entered the country illegally to Guantanamo Bay and the facility there? I know you work very closely with, call it Border Patrol broadly. I'm curious, like, any thoughts you've heard from those people, any thoughts that, hey, this might impact policy? What are your thoughts in general? I mean, for you and I, Gitmo was high value terrorists, or people that were at a risk to the United States globally. What are your thoughts about opening that up to just people who are illegally crossing the border?
Well, I'll say this: it's not an uncommon thing. Besides Guantanamo, using prisons in America to house illegal immigrants is not uncommon. This was done.
Yeah, they're going to go somewhere, right?
Right. Yeah. During the Obama administration, during that era, there was several, what do you call them? I guess programs that were in place that it would house anyone that comes over illegally gets 30 days of jail time while they're going through their investigation as kind of punishment for their crime of entering the country illegally under like the USC 1325, right? And so what they did was 30 days, sometimes it'd be 60 days, sometimes it'd be 6 months to a year, depending on how many times they've attempted to cross illegally. So using a prison already isn't uncommon. It might be to people who've forgotten kind of what the systems looks like, but there is nothing in place in our government that is for housing immigrants, right? There's nothing other than using a prison for it. And in those systems, those prisons, the funny thing about it is that, I wouldn't say funny, but the interesting thing about it is that these inmates are held because of an immigration status, not for the immigration status, but also coming in criminally into the country. But they're also housed sometimes with other criminals, murderers, drug smugglers, and whatnot. And so that becomes a different layer of this that I found during my time as a prison guard in kind of the same kind of capacity. I think it's optics. Using Guantanamo Bay just kind of sets a precedent, and I really believe that's what it is. I don't know necessarily why would we have to do that. We have so many private prisons that will take them in, right? Because the private prison space does that and has done that in the past. And so I think it was more of kind of a checkmate, kind of a, here are my cards, I'm going to use Guantanamo Bay. But in all honesty, using, prisons to house immigrants is not uncommon. It's used all the time. We don't have any other capacity in which to hold them.
Would it, by moving them to Guantanamo, there's obviously a logistical component of that. I think they're doing a lot of this with military aircraft. Would it reduce a little bit of the burden on those private prisons or the prison system in the United States that's not private, the federally state-run facilities?
I imagine it'll have the same kind of laws that all kind of holding any kind of persons would be in that capacity. It's going to be 3 hot meals, medical attention, and beds. So I don't think it's going to be any different. Maybe it's cheaper there. Maybe it's cheaper on the state and the government in that capacity. But that's why private prisons became a kind of a thing. They were able to house inmates at a cheaper rate and for a better contract. And so that's why they ended up blowing up, because they were able to save certain states money because they were able to do the same thing that the state would do or federally would do, and they'll do it cheaper. And so I imagine maybe it's a cheaper idea, but I don't know how that works in Guantanamo Bay. Is it going to have military members doing it like they did during our time? I have
That's
no
a good
idea.
question. I mean, who's gonna be actually running the facility? I would imagine, because I know that there are still a few terrorists, Al Qaeda members in Guantanamo. I imagine that this isn't going to be an open population scenario where they're going to be commingling and sharing meals and ideas. That would be a horrendously bad idea. If I was in charge, I would say maybe don't do that. Again, if you look at it from that perspective, the situation you're talking about in the private prison where these people are being housed with murderers, rapists, all of these things, and they actually are commingling. I wonder if it is better from that perspective to have them in a place where that commingling doesn't exist. Not that there couldn't be murderers, rapists, all those things in that cohort that is crossing illegally. But yeah, I mean, I think I tend to agree with you, man. I think the optic of it is it's tough because people associate Gitmo with torture. They associate it with poor living conditions. And I don't think that they have any reason to not associate it with that. I mean, I think the people running that did a really good job of creating those conditions at times. I think it's actually had a lot more oversight and scrutiny since then. But I hadn't thought about who's going to actually be manning the walls.
Yeah, that's working in the prison. It's normally 3 different shifts, just like any kind of law enforcement work. It's going to be a morning of swings and a midnight shift, and then you have the supervisory side of it as well, and also the case management side and the warden side. So it's a big tasking, and I imagine that's going to take a lot of people to manage that appropriately. The other things I think about is, just recently I was down on the border, and there was 2 individuals who were apprehended at the wall, and it looked like they were tinkering. And when I asked some of the agents of like, what are they doing? Because it looked like they wanted to be apprehended. And so one of the new TTPs that's out there right now for some of the smuggling organizations is send a couple of their guys to get apprehended, caught, and put into the jail system so they inside can start recruiting and saying, hey, if you want access to be able to come across legally without getting apprehended, use our services. And so,
Stop it.
yes. And so in a recruitment kind of aspect to it. And so,
Fuck.
yeah. And so knowing that, like, that's how intricate this shit can kind of get is, how much of that idea we've all probably seen the movie Blow, where you go in there with an associate's in drug smuggling, you leave with a PhD.
Oh yeah.
How many of these people go into Gitmo and actually learn more about the system, get out, and eventually kind of start using it against us?
God, I had not thought about drumming up business by intentionally sending some of your people there to spread the word.
Yeah.
I don't have enough time on my hands to think deeply about crime because I'd probably be a shitty criminal because I don't know if I would have ever thought of that.
Yeah. When I first saw it, I was like, that. I told him, I said, that was odd because the guy had a small, like, it was like a bolt, it's harmless, but he had it and he's kind of scraping the fence. And I'm like, it's
You're talking the metal monstrosity down there.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, it's obvious he's just fiddle fucking around with this thing. And so it's like, what's going on? The guy's like, yeah, this happens all the time. And I was like, holy shit. So these dudes somehow get convinced enough to get arrested, to go into imprisonment and some sort and start recruiting from the inside. That's fucking bonkers, man. That's next level shit.
It's kind of genius, to be honest with you. You're putting you're the kind of the canary in the coal mine, I guess, a little bit. You're putting your canary in there to recruit people, to get people. I mean, man. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the biggest mistakes people can make is underestimating their adversary or their opponent, however they would want to view. I'm not trying to necessarily view one entity negatively, but underestimating the people you're going up against, never a good idea.
Yeah. The other thing in the prison side of stuff is that I'm very curious to how much it's going to cost, right? Because what it came down to, the prison system, the private prisons are always weird. That's one that, like, you can go on forever how controversial that is. When you start making money off of imprisonment of people, it starts to become very shady in how that works. But the cost of just the food alone is one thing. It's the medication, the medical side. We had guys that were illegal immigrants intentionally getting apprehended, knowing they'd spend time in prison, knowing that they had AIDS, HIV, these very expensive kind of diseases that they knew that our medical kind of rule and law was to continue to provide care. And so that was interesting to me to know, like, how much money are we spending on just these illegal migrants or illegal immigrants that are here trying to just gain efforts of using our own medical. That's that's a whole different level of like of how much cost does it take for us to do that. I'm Vince Vargas, the host of the Ironclad original Borderland. Last season, we took you on the front lines of the border crisis. That was just the beginning. Now, we're going deeper. On the new season of Borderland, Narcosis, we'll take an even closer look at the institutions, criminal forces, drugs, and operations that are driving mass migration from regions torn apart by violence and corruption. We're pulling back the curtain on the ruthless forces that drive mass migration. Organized crime.
You know, another question for you, and this is a video that I've seen circulated so much, and I'm not trying to negatively harp on AOC or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. It was the new border czar. They were going back and forth, and she kept saying that crossing into the United States illegally was not a crime.
Yeah.
Can you clarify whether or not it is a crime? Because that was legitimately one of her talking points, that it was civil instead of criminal.
Yeah, that's the weirdest part, is that she was hanging her hat on the asylum clause, right? So when you're seeking asylum, it's considered to be not illegal if you're coming and trying to seek asylum because they think it's a humanitarian issue. But that's completely false narrative. If you enter the country outside of a port of entry, that's here's the ports of entry, anywhere in between those, you are breaking a law, right? It's federal law, it's USC 1325, right? Entering into the country or exiting out of the country in between a port of entry is breaking the law. So anyone who does that already has committed a crime. Okay. She was stating the claim that, but if they're seeking asylum, it's okay. And that's false. They've broken a crime, right? They've broken the law and now they're seeking asylum. Okay. In the last administration, they were very lenient on this subject. They were saying, no, they're seeking asylum. It's okay. But the truth of it is they already have broken a law and they could be held accountable for that law. And before Biden and even before Trump, during the Obama administration, I use him because that's when I served as a border patrol agent, was that no, they still spent time in jail. And after that, they can be seen by an immigration judge to determine their case. And at that time, they can appeal the case and they can stay in imprisonment for up to a year, continuing to appeal their case and trying to fight it, saying they're seeking asylum. And so that was what she was trying to use, like, no, they're seeking asylum. It's not illegal. They're asylum seekers. Completely false narrative. She was trying to use that. It doesn't work. But during the administration of the Biden administration, they were allowing that. They were supportive of that. And they were allowing that claim to be justified.
I think it's so important to have that clarification because that video I have seen circulated so many times. And I've heard other people repeat those talking points. And even for myself, I wasn't sure where the legality existed. I knew that there are ports of entry, and I know that there are countries that you can claim asylum from, and there are countries that you cannot claim asylum from, which is another thing that a lot of people don't realize. They think that a Mexican citizen can come north of the border and say, I'm claiming asylum. Like, nope, you don't get to do that. They're not on the list of countries.
So I'll clarify.
Largely unknown.
Yeah. I'll clarify even more is that before the Biden administration, there is a list that is deemed approved to seek asylum based on different reasons, right? Political persecution, the country itself, like Venezuela at one point, was just completely destroyed, right? And so economic reasons, whatnot. And so there were certain countries that were identified, yes, they can claim asylum. They just have to continue to prove that they're seeking asylum when they get to an immigration judge. But during this administration, for reasons I don't know, I'm not high enough on that echelon to understand this, but everyone was allowed to claim asylum. Even people from Mexico, even people from any country, it didn't matter. They would come in and just say, I'm seeking asylum. And they were given the opportunity to see an immigration judge. That's where the letter, the NTAs were, the notice to appears, were received. It wasn't up for the Border Patrol to make a determination of that case, or ICE at the time. It's just, okay, we'll let the immigration judge deal with it. Here's your NTA into the country. When your time comes, you can see them and they'll make a determination of the case. If they showed up for the case, we've had this conversation before. If they actually showed up, then the immigration judge would do their job. And for the most part, they weren't getting approved. They weren't getting approved asylum. And so that's what was happening during this administration. It was kind of a very loose list that everyone could go ahead and claim it and let the immigration judge do their due diligence. And so that's the weird thing. But the other side of immigration, if you're claiming asylum, it's usually the first nearest border from your country of origin is where you seek asylum. And so someone from outside of Mexico, they can't cross Mexico, come straight to America and say, I'm seeking asylum here. And they originate from Guatemala or Honduras, right? It wasn't approved, but that's what was happening. And even Mexico was doing their best to stop other countries from coming into their country and seeking asylum. Mexico was doing their best, but there were some cases like the Haitians during the crazy Haitian kind of the massive influx of them. The Mexican side of the border was saying, oh, here's your asylum paperwork. Go ahead and pass on through to America. They were like, we don't want you to stay here. We're going to make you a legal citizen as in during your asylum seeking, but keep on going. You know what I mean? And so you had a lot of the Haitians that were legally permitted in Mexico holding permitos or holding permission cards, and they were still trying to gain access into America. So they were just always kind of finding the loophole in the system.
How's it been what's Trump been in office now, 3 weeks? What are you feeling at the border with people working in CBP or ICE or anybody in that ecosystem down there?
I mean, I'm looking at the numbers on social media. The Border Patrol's doing a really good job of like displaying what the numbers look like every day. It's kind of very transparent on how it looks. And the numbers are way down, which is a good thing, right? It shows that you didn't need this crazy executive order to be signed or some big border bill to be signed to actually implement the job that they're meant to be doing. I think it's going in a positive direction. Obviously, there's scrutiny on both sides of it. I think the media still does a really terrible job in trying to demonize what's happening. And so that's the frustrating part from where I sit. I see what the media is doing and making the ICE look bad, making Border Patrol look bad. But for the most part, I think Border Patrol is very proud to be able to do their job again and feel like they're justified in doing their job. And as well as ICE is doing their job in the sense of what they were supposed to be doing all along that they weren't allowed to be doing. They were handcuffed by an administration. And so right now, from what I know, the morale is up. And it's really unfortunate that the media kind of continues to shape this as if the government is deporting all immigrants. Like if you're just an immigrant, you're getting deported. That's absolutely false. It's a false narrative. It's unfair to the system and how they use that. Truth is, if you are an illegal immigrant, if you came over to this country illegally, then there's a potential that you're on a list, especially if you've broken the law since then. And the administration prior was handcuffing ICE from doing their job. There's a list out there that they're looking for, and they're using their all the proof that they have to go in and go ahead and trying to deport these individuals who've already broken 2 crimes now, entering the country illegally and then further committing another crime after that.